Welcome. We are glad you're here. Thanks for coming out. I'm David Calhoun, director of the Gonzaga Faith and Reason Institute, and we're really excited about a set of talks that we have today. The Gonzaga Faith and Reason Institute seeks to develop an integrationist understanding of faith and reason, particularly as it's articulated in the Catholic intellectual tradition and found in issues such as faith and science, philosophical theology, reflection on evil and suffering, and the cultural and social impact of Christianity. Activities organized by the Faith and Reason Institute are financially supported by the Father Robert J. Spitzer Society of Jesus Leadership Fund, for which we're deeply grateful. And if you, by the way, are a fan of Father Robert Spitzer, he's going to be here in the spring. He's come for talks for the past couple of years in the spring, and he was instrumental not only in funding the Institute, but actually if we trace the history back, he was instrumental in starting the Faith and Reason Institute when he was here as Gonzaga's president. So we're very grateful about that and looking forward to seeing him again this spring. Our two talks today, right now, and at 7 p.m. tonight, but not in this place. I just want to make that clear. The location is the Globe Room of Cataldo building, which is across campus in front of the administration building, or what's now called College Hall. So I hope you'll come at 7 p.m. Our two talks today are about the Christian thinker C.S. Lewis. Lewis is known to many people by his imaginative fantasy series, The Chronicles of Narnia. But Lewis was also, in addition to being a professor of literature, he was also a rigorous and winsome writer and speaker for faith-reason integration. So he makes a natural figure for the Faith and Reason Institute to focus on, which is also why this event and the event tonight are co-sponsored by the Gonzaga Socratic Club, which has similar overlapping focuses and interests. Our speaker today is Robert K. Garcia. Robert Garcia is Associate Professor of Philosophy at Baylor University. His research lies primarily at the intersection of metaphysics and philosophy of religion, with particular focus on the nature and value of human persons. He has authored numerous articles and book chapters and co-edited several volumes, including a recent co-authored book on the series about the life of Jesus, The Chosen. So you might want to take a look at that if you're a fan of The Chosen. He has taught courses on C.S. Lewis for years. I didn't ask you how many years.
8.
Okay, 8 years. Do you know how many sections of C.S. Lewis?
25.
25.
I had to count recently.
All right. Or are you teaching one right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
2.
All right. Excellent. So we have a genuine expert on C.S. Lewis. In fact, he's now working on a book with a colleague from Baylor University on the relationship between C.S. Lewis and Søren Kierkegaard, which is just fascinating. So please welcome Robert Garcia for his talk, Look Thy First on All Things Lovely, Lewis's Eschatological Platonism.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me here. Is this on? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So glad to be here. Look forward to sharing some ideas with you and then hearing your thoughts and questions about what I have to share. So I have a few slides to go through, and so the focus of this talk, broadly speaking, is what it means to be a human being, human nature, and destiny in particular. Like what is in store for us. And this is within Lewis's framework that I want to work within today. So why this focus on Lewis? Lewis is arguably one of the most, if not the most, influential religious writer of the 20th century. And it's been often noted that one of the central themes of his whole work is personhood. He's always writing about what it means to be a person, and in particular, what persons are and what their destiny might be. So it's a good focus, and I'm convinced that what Lewis has to say, what he has to show us, is worth looking at and paying attention to, maybe even entertaining with some strong degree of hospitality. So I'm given to you to consider and to compare with other views that you've heard about Lewis. So let me begin with an anecdote. So Bishop Simon Barrington Ward was a student of Lewis, and he tells a story, actually several stories, about his relationship with Lewis. So I'm just going to read this to you in 3 parts. He says, "One day I made a mild complaint about the dullness of the Cambridge countryside, contrasted with other places I had known and loved. He turned on me quite gravely. 'You should never condemn any genuine countryside in that way,' he said almost severely to me. 'In every landscape, you should try to feel for its real nature and quality, and let it grasp hold of you. The day is coming when, beyond this life, we shall recognize that quality in the eternal fulfillment in which it will have its true place.' On another walk, at the side of a flight of swans landing with a great flurry of water on the radiant river on a sunlit afternoon, I quoted Walter de la Mare, 'Look thy last on all things lovely every hour.' Again came one of those unexpected rebukes from which I learned so much from Jack. No, no, it should certainly not be 'look thy last,' but 'look thy first on all things lovely.' Every sight and sound that is good, every touch of beauty or rightness, is pointing ahead to its ultimate fulfillment in the world to come." Soon after that, I read for the first time The Weight of Glory, where Lewis writes, "We are summoned to pass in through nature, beyond her, into that splendor which she fitfully reflects." This was the supreme aspect of the gospel, which Jack somehow, in so many ways, made us more and more conscious, as I believe he became more and more conscious of it himself. That sense of anticipation, of what he called eschatological Platonism, the knowledge that the ideal and the real are not laid up statically in some metaphysical realm, but are emerging through this life and lie ahead of us, and so are to be met within and through and ultimately beyond this life. I love this story about Lewis and what he told this student of his, and we can use it as a point of departure for what I want to show you today. So Lewis's eschatological Platonism is his big metaphysical framework that you really need to understand to get a sense for how he thinks about human persons in particular and human destiny as well. So I want to unpack that for you. And so here's my little outline. It's a short talk, but I have an outline mostly to keep me on the straight and narrow path here. So the first thing I want to do is compare Lewis's Platonism to Plato's Platonism. Lewis didn't agree with Plato on everything, of course, and the ways in which he differed are really important. So we'll look at that, and then I want to look at the implications both for good in general and also for human good in particular. Okay, so a little chart for you. Plato versus Lewis. They both had this picture or view about degrees of reality, where things stand in a hierarchy of being. So this is a quick flyover of Plato's view and Lewis's view in contrast. So you can think of it as a kind of stack of things. At the bottom are shadows, and right above that are objects. So just think of an apple as an object, and you can see the shadow of the apple. Roughly that's the kind of thing he had in mind, a kind of sketchy representation of something and the thing itself, right? And then above that are what he called the forms. And you can think of the forms as kind of blueprints for things, right? So the apple, there's a form of applehood, right? And each apple participates in that form. And that form is the source, the blueprint, that makes things apples if they're apples, right? But the forms themselves also have a source. And it's the form of the good. And it's like at the very top. And the form of the good is the source and the ground and the explanation of everything that exists, right? So it's the master blueprint, if you will, of everything else. So a couple of things about Plato's ontology here. First, the relationship between, say, a form and an object is that of participation. And I understand this in terms of resemblance. So the shadow resembles the apple resembles the form of applehood, and so on. And an important thing that will be different for Lewis is that Plato's ontology is fixed and parasitic. It's fixed in the sense that shadows don't somehow evolve into apples, right? If you're at a certain level in Plato's ontology, well, you're going to stay there, right? And things are dependent. So the apples are dependent on the form of applehood, and the shadow obviously is dependent on the apple itself. Okay. Lewis shares the same basic structure, but as a Christian Platonist, he identifies the good with God. So God is the ultimate source and ground and explanation for everything else. And we have the same basic structure, forms and objects and shadows. But for Lewis, this relationship here is not really one of participation in Plato's sense, but what he calls transposition. And so Lewis has a certain kind of meaning that he assigns to this term that I'm going to unpack for you. And it's this way in which he differs from Plato. So transposition isn't merely a resemblance kind of relation. It's the idea that the higher is somehow, in some sense, present in the lower, right? Later, I'll show you, he calls this a sacramental relation, to give you a primer on it. So, unlike Plato, this is not a static ontology. Objects are sort of made to ascend, right? To sort of move up, move towards the source of all things, and become more and more like God on Lewis's view. So these are the two different views, and the key thing about Lewis's view is that there's this idea of transposition, which is a dynamic idea that things kind of have the higher forms present in them, and they're meant to kind of move into it. Okay. So here's a sort of an analysis of transposition to give a kind of general definition of it. So you have transposition whenever you have two different things, the higher and the lower, and there are different ways to think about the differences. You can have higher and lower, richer and poorer, more or less content, more or less reality. I'm going to give you several examples to flesh this out. And you have reproduction of the higher, or representation of the higher in the lower. So two types of examples that I'll give you. Most of them are static examples, and the last one will be a dynamic example, and you'll see what I mean. So the best kind of example, and I have to sort of put this down, because I like to do shadow puppets. So here is a shadow puppet of a bird. That is a transposition of my hand, right? My hand is a three-dimensional object. The shadow is a two-dimensional object. My hand is multicolored. The shadow is black, roughly. But also, my hand can stay the same, and yet you get different shadows of it, right? So the very same thing can be transposed in an infinite number of ways, right? There's lots of ways my hand can be represented, right? So when you have a transposition, the shadow is the transposition, and it's kind of a diluted form or a representation of that which it transposes. There's more to the hand than to the shadow. That's probably pretty clear. Another important example is a geometric example. So a circle is a transposition of a sphere. So if you think of a sphere being a three-dimensional object and you cut a plane through a sphere, you get a circle. And so the circle, if you look at just the circle, you can say, well, the sphere is present in the circle, but there's more to the sphere than you find in the circle, right? Same kind of idea, transposition. So the same sphere, as it's represented in a two-dimensional reality, can have different transpositions. As it moves through it, you get a different size circle. So one of Lewis's books that he liked is Flatland. Has anybody read this book? A few people. Right, okay. And so Flatland is about these two-dimensional beings, and they're trying to make sense of three-dimensional objects that appear in their world, right? And this has been happily illustrated for us by John Keel. So if you're a flatlander and you're looking, you basically see just a line, right? You live in a plane. So if a three-dimensional object intersects your world, of course you don't see a sphere if it's a circle that's intersecting. You just see a line in front of you, right? And so this is the flatlander's experience of a sphere. So here's the sphere, here's the flatlander's world, and this bottom line here, which is enlarged so we can see what's going on, is what it looks like to see a sphere. So as it moves through, you get a little bitty green line, and as it goes further through, you get a longer line, and then a shorter line again. So you get the idea. So a sphere is transposed into the flatlander's world as just a two-dimensional object. It's a circle, but looked alongside, it's just a line. Okay, another example of transposition are photographs. So you can take this color, grainy image of Lewis here, and you can transpose it into a grayscale image, and further down into a black and white image. And each of the images on the left is a transposition of an image on the right. Okay, here's a dynamic example of transposition, and this is a crucial one for Lewis. So an acorn is a transposition of an oak tree. In particular, if you have an acorn in your hand, it's a transposition of the oak tree that it's meant to become, right? So as it grows and matures into an oak tree, it's still a transposition of an oak tree as it matures, right? It moves along this path towards becoming more and more like an oak tree. Okay, back to just to remind you, here's a summary slide of what transposition involves. Two systems, higher and lower, and you can get transpositions all over the place. And if you think about it, you can come up with your own examples. Okay. So that's what's going on with transposition. Lewis makes two claims about transpositions that are important. The first is that what's happening in the lower can only be fully understood if you know something about the higher, right? So if I simply showed you a black and white image, you wouldn't know much about what it's about. You'd say, well, I don't know if that's an image of somebody wearing a plaid shirt or a polka dot shirt, because in the image the shirt is just black, right? So for example, if you didn't see the image on the right, and I only showed you the image on the left, notice I have X and Y just to sort of roughly pick out a different pixel. The pixel here at Y is black, and so is the one at X. But those pixels represent different colors over here, roughly brownish red and gray, right? So if you only see the thing on the left, you don't know exactly what it represents, right? So you have to know something about the higher in order to fully interpret and understand the lower. The second thing is that the relationship between the two, Lewis says, is a sacramental relation and not a symbolic relation. So think about just symbolic relations. So we have some symbols over here that I'm pointing at, and they represent, we've decided to let them represent this bow wow fuzzy thing over here, right? And this is just a matter of convention, that we let this symbolize that, right? There's no real sense in which the fuzzy bow wow thing is present in the scribble, the DOG, right? In a transposition, this is not the case. That the higher, according to Lewis, is sacramentally present in the lower, right? Okay, we're at the place where I want to shift the hinge point here to look at the implications as Lewis draws them out. So why does all this matter for human nature, how we think about ourselves and our destiny? So let's go back to the anecdote. Look at what Lewis told his student here. He says, in every landscape, you should try to feel for its real nature and quality. So notice this word quality. It's like you're seeing something beautiful and good, right? That's the quality. And he's saying you'll recognize that quality, that good thing, that beautiful thing, later in the eternal fulfillment in which it will have its true place. says the same thing here. Every sight and sound that is good, every touch of beauty or rightness is pointing ahead, right? So each beautiful, good thing that we experience is really two things. It's a transposition of something greater and richer, and it's a pointer to that greater thing that will be a fulfillment of it. So we'll see that this is true for all good things, including persons, right? So earthly goods and pleasures, according to Lewis, are all transpositions, and they're transpositions of heavenly goods and pleasures, and ultimately of God. Okay, let's look at each of these in turn. So earthly goods versus heavenly goods. You can ask yourself, what are the things that I identify in my experience as good, beautiful, the things that I really enjoy, like the taste of pizza, right? The experience of a sunset, right? I don't know, playing pickleball, whatever, whatever it is for you that are sort of, uncontroversially good or beautiful. I'm sure if you've thought about it, you've asked, okay, so what, will this be in heaven? Like, will pizza just not be in heaven? Will we have no experience of the good things that we experience in this life in heaven? Or are they just going to be just not there? Maybe we'll have other good stuff, but there'll be this disconnect. So what's the relationship between earthly goods and heavenly goods? We can use Venn diagrams to kind of get at this. So maybe there's no overlap. This seems unlikely, but that's logically a possible view. Maybe there's partial overlap, so maybe there's some of the heavenly goods, or maybe some of the earthly goods are there, but not all of them. Maybe they're included, so all of them are there, but there's more, right? So all the earthly goods and beautiful things are there, but there's more that's there, right? That seems pretty plausible. None of these quite capture Lewis's view, and I think part of the problem is that Venn diagrams are two-dimensional diagrams, right? I think to capture Lewis's view, you need a three-dimensional kind of Venn diagram, which we should invent, I guess. So eschatological Platonism says, yes, this is right, but it's not the whole story. And notice, this illustrates the kind of, all of the earthly pleasures are included in all the heavenly pleasures. So far, so good, right? But what Lewis is saying is something about the particular pleasures, right? So this is true for all the earthly goods, but when you look at each particular earthly good, each earthly good is a transposition, right? So if you look at them individually, they're in heaven, but they're like the circles, right? So for each earthly good or beautiful thing, think of it as a circle, and in heaven there will be a corresponding sphere, kind of expanded, bigger version of that good. So this is a way of thinking about the relationship between earthly pleasures and beauties and goods and heavenly ones on Lewis's picture. So let's look now at how this bears upon human beings. Like, what does this mean for us? Now, I've already hinted at the idea that on Lewis's account, all good things are transpositions, and persons are among the good things, right? You are, on Lewis's account, a transposition, right? Of what? Well, this might sound crazy, but you're a transposition of God on Lewis's view. Let's look at this. So think of this as being sort of a person's timeline of development. If all goes well for you, you have in the future a heavenly self. On Lewis's account, the relationship between your current self and your heavenly self is one of transposition. Right? You are a transposition of the person that you're meant to become, right? Just like the acorn and the oak tree, right? So that's the kind of relationship on Lewis's account. Now, I have a question mark here because if you remember, one of Lewis's points is that you can't really know much about the sort of higher level, the lower level, unless you know something about the higher level. So if you ask, well, what am I a transposition of, right? Well, ultimately God in some interesting sense, but in between God and myself, what lies ahead for me? Well, there's a bit of a mystery to it, right? If you asked an acorn, hey, what are you going to be when you grow up? Unless imagine he's sort of an isolated acorn being cared for in a lonely old pot in a backyard somewhere, doesn't see other acorns around, pretending acorns can look, right? He's going to say, I don't know, like, I'm not sure, right? Maybe something like I am, but more, right? And that's what Lewis thinks about human persons as well, that we know not what we shall be. So on Lewis's account, earthly goods are like candle flames. And this illustration matches a quote that I'm going to read you in a moment. So candles are among the good things. And we can ask, well, in heaven, what will be the corresponding objects? And it's more like a sunrise. So notice a sunrise can make a candle practically invisible, right? It's there, but it's sort of engulfed, right? Lewis likes this concept of being engulfed, for example. If you read Paralandra, things become engulfed by the larger. So here's the quote I will finish with. And he sums up some of his big ideas here. He says, our natural experiences, sensory, emotional, imaginative, are only like the drawing, like penciled lines on flat paper. If they vanish in the risen life, they will vanish only as pencil lines vanish from the real landscape. Not as a candle flame that is put out, but as a candle flame which becomes invisible because someone has pulled up the blind, thrown open the shutters, and let in the blaze of the risen sun. So with us, we know not what we shall be, but we may be sure we shall be more, not less, than we were on earth. Okay, you see the idea, hopefully. That's all I want to say. I'm happy to take your questions. Well, I ended early. Okay. Good.
I'll let Professor Garcia field questions, but can I ask if we could have maybe a first one or two questions from students, please? If students have questions.
Yes.
Does C.S. Lewis only talk about like the goods of the world, or does he have a take on how like our sins and our failings are also a transposition of something higher?
That's a great question.
Robert, maybe repeat the question. To
Yes, good. So on Lewis's account, goods are transpositions of greater things, ultimately God. And your question is, well, how should we understand evil, right, on Lewis's account? Lewis held to the sort of classical view that evil is a ontological parasite. It's the absence of good. So it's not a thing in itself. Like we talk about donut holes, right? And if I order a bunch of donut holes, I expect a bag of these round things. I don't expect somebody to say, yeah, they're already included in the donuts I've given you in the middle, right? So donut holes, we can count them, but they don't exist on their own, right? And so Lewis took the classical view that evil is that kind of a thing. It's the absence of good. So I think he would say evil is not really a transposition of anything. It's the lack of it's the lack of a transposition. It's where transpositions fail to occur when they should. Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. Any other students? Okay, we're graduating up to the non-students. We're all students in a way. Other questions? Yes?
Most of Lewis's books were just stories. You know, he wrote some philosophical, but a lot of it was just stories. Did you draw this out of those stories, or did you draw this out of his more philosophical work?
This quote, I think it's from his sermon, The Weight of Glory, but I don't remember offhand where it's from. It's one of those that's so familiar to me. He wrote, it depends on how you count. He actually wrote 23 fiction books and about 36 nonfiction books, if you count collections of essays. So most people don't realize that. His corpus is very large, and it's about 2/3 nonfiction. But this is from one of his sermons, I'm sure, or essays. Yeah, thank you for that. Other questions? Yes?
I was kind of just curious how my thought compares to, kind of an answer in prayer when I'm trying to figure it out and understand. The image that I got was I am like the embryo in the womb, trying to figure out what's outside there.
Yeah, great.
So how does that kind of fit with C.S. Lewis thinking?
That's a perfect illustration. The embryo is like the acorn, yeah, and the embryo has no clue what's in store for it. Yeah, I think that is, he does think that we are embryonic in our current stage, and that we're meant to mature and grow into these greater, more glorious beings. And on his account, as we each mature into the beings that we're intended to become, we actually become increasingly different from each other. So we don't sort of converge into the same kind of thing. We become increasingly distinct as we become increasingly good. Yes?
Does Lewis see the transposition as a process, or is it just grace happens and enlightenment, or what? It's just, you die, and supposedly you go to a different state, but what did you do to make that happen? Is it just the grace of God?
Right. So the question is what brings about the transformation? Yeah. The other part is maybe you're asking two things. One is transposition as a concept, is it the concept of a process, or is it something else? And at any rate, how do we move or become transformed? On the first question, it's kind of unclear to me. Some people interpret Lewis's concept of transposition as a process. I don't think it is. At least I don't understand it that way. That's not how I've described it. It's just a relationship between two things. But on his account, there is a process that's intended, and that does happen. So there's transposition, strictly speaking, is just the way two things are related to each other, even though one is in the process of becoming the other. But in terms of the more important question really is on Lewis's account, how does transposition or transformation happen? He doesn't seem to think that it's a sort of a single moment in time thing, right? That transformation happens gradually, right? Through a series of choices where you become more and more of a certain kind of thing, right? So it's a process of becoming. It's not, on his view, usually something that happens at a sort of a single moment in time. Right? Transformation requires consent. It requires you're freely sort of making decisions to become a certain kind of thing, even if you're choosing to let God transform you along the way. I could say a lot more about that, but that's a bit about how grace is involved there. Did you want to follow up this time?
Is your transposition, is it complete at a certain point, or is it as good as it gets?
Right. Do you ever arrive? On Lewis's account, as far as I can tell, no. He has, in the Narnia Chronicles, the famous slogan is "further up, further in," and you see the same thing in the Great Divorce. His idea seems to be that, look, you are undergoing a process of divinization, theosis. You're becoming increasingly like God in the way that nobody else can. But that just means there's no point of arrival, right? There is a destination in a certain sense. Like there's God and His rich, glorious being, but He's infinitely rich and glorious, right? And so as you become increasingly like God, you never quite get there, right? So for Lewis, it's transformation. There is a kind of threshold, sort of a entrance into heaven kind of threshold, or maybe sort of leaving purgatory and going into heaven on Lewis's account. And so there are threshold moments, but that doesn't mean that you ever fully arrive. Yeah. So, yeah. There are other questions. We'll just go. Yes. Thank you.
But in the case of the acorn does arrive at its higher reality.
Right.
The oak tree. So what makes human transposition different?
Great question. So the acorn example, if you take that one on its face, you might think, well, then there's a point of arrival for an acorn. There's the oak tree, right? Two responses. One is that may not be true for human beings. So maybe that's just how transposition works for acorns and oak trees, right? It's just an illustration of a kind of dynamic process. But even on the oak tree example, when does an acorn become an oak tree? There's kind of a, philosophers will argue about this vagueness between that. But go find an oak tree on campus. There it is. We have a lot of them on Baylor's campus. You point at an oak tree, let's call it a young oak tree. It's an oak tree, but notice it's still growing, right? It's still getting bigger and larger, right? So arriving at the stage of being an oak tree is consistent with having further growth in your future. Yeah. Yes?
Can you say something, let me set up my question first, something about the relationship between myth and analysis. So for Plato, noesis is the highest sort of form of thinking on the divided line, which surpasses presumably the myth that we begin with in the dialogues. But myth for Lewis seems to be something more than a stage to be surpassed. So is myth retained in that fourth dimensional fullness of reality, transposed reality? Is there some mythical or story element there?
Yeah, great. So should we understand, or how does Lewis understand myth within the framework of transpositions? Yeah. He clearly thinks that myths are transpositions. That's part of the answer. So if you have and on Lewis's account, and this is kind of interesting, a myth is not, take the myth of Icarus, right? The myth itself is not a given written down story, right? You can have a lot of translations of the myth of Icarus. You can have elaborations on it. You can have like a nutshell depiction of it. So the myth itself is not, it's kind of a strange entity on its own, right? But on Lewis's account, myths are things, they're real, and they put us into contact with transcendent realities, right? So they're a kind of, he calls them an isthmus, like that there's the mainland and then there's a little island. There are ways to get from an island to the mainland, right? They're gateways and pointers. So they're real and they are transpositions, and like all transpositions, they point to something greater and transcendent. Is that, I didn't catch everything you were after, but is that?
That helps.
Okay. And what's funny, and I'll say this and just run away from the mic, but on Lewis's account, I think you are a myth. Yeah. In other words, when you look at how he defines myths, persons turn out to be myths. And then, Tumnus's cave, he has this book, his mana myth, right? Yes. But not in the sense that you might think so. Go ahead.
Yeah, obviously the idea is comforting in terms of we shall be more, not less than we are. Is there, for you or for Lewis, is there an ethical dimension in terms of how we see other people, how we should relate to other people because of this particular assumption about our ultimate end?
Great, yeah. Is there a ethical component to this vision about persons? Does it sort of put a certain demand on us? Do we have certain obligations that follow from it? It's just it does underscore the value of the individual, right? So in tonight's talk, I'll talk more about this in terms of like what foundation does Lewis provide for the idea that persons have a kind of dignity and value. This is part of the story. Part of what makes a person sort of supremely valuable is that you're a unique image of God, right? You have this capacity to sort of image God in a way that nobody else can, right? So if you look around the room, your neighbor has this incredible potential, right? That's part of what makes them valuable, right? And because they have that value and that dignity, they deserve to be treated in certain ways. That's part of the story. So that's one side of it has to do with, if you're asking for the ethical, moral implications, there's one of them has to do with providing a ground foundation for rights and dignity. There's another one, though, that I didn't talk about this here much, but tonight I will, that persons are unique transpositions of God. They have the capacity to image God in a way that only they can do so. And I think what follows from that, and Lewis doesn't say much about this, other people do, is that with that unique power comes a unique responsibility. So you have been uniquely empowered to reveal God in a way that only you can. And with that comes a vocation, a mission, an obligation even to do so. Yeah. So is that enough for you, or do you?
Sure.
Okay. Yes, in the back.
I love C.S. Lewis, and I have a lot of his books,
Great.
and I love reading them. But it's really funny because he's English, and he lived a little while ago, not a long time ago. Sometimes you'll start getting something, and then he'll phrase it in a way that you don't understand. It's like in another language.
Sure.
And it's very frustrating. So I wonder if anybody has ever kind of rewritten some of this stuff, or if there's anyone that there's kind of, well, that's one question. The other is which of his books are kind of the easiest to sense what he's talking about?
I don't know of any translations other than Narnia for children that's really written down.
That might work.
Yeah, I don't know what to point you to on that front.
Any ones that he writes that are kind of easier to understand than others?
I mean, the Narnia Chronicles are probably the most accessible, and you can find some of this material in there if you're looking for it. It often is said about Lewis that like in everything that he writes, all of his ideas are there. And I find that true. You can pick up any of his work and you can, he's got a whole view that's sort of lurking in the background. So the Narnia Chronicles, I really like The Great Divorce, so that's one of the ones I often teach. So, yeah.
Robert, share your story about writing screw tape letters.
Okay.
I
Sure.
didn't out you, but...
Which story? I am trying to, but...
Well, that's related to her comment.
Oh, okay.
About updating or...
That's true.
Trying to reconceive Lewis's voice. Tell us a little bit about that.
I'm a little embarrassed. So for years, I've looked at people who try and write screw tape letter, pastiches, like, I'm going to write a new version of the screw tape letters, and it hardly ever comes out very, very well. It's always overwritten and forced, and but now I'm doing it myself, so I couldn't help myself. I was interested in Lewis's views about technology. What does Lewis say about technology? And, if you look at the screw tape letters, is there anything in the screw tape letters that has to do with technology? And so I went and reread the letters and pulled out some ideas. This is the background story, I guess. And so I pulled about a bunch of ideas out of the screw tape letters that, sort of in the abstract, claims that Lewis is making about technology. And then I started thinking, I wonder how a new screw tape letter would put this. And I just started writing some. So I am trying to write some screw tape letters for the digital age on the theme of technology. I can share them with you if you just email me. They're still in draft form. I have about 14 written, aiming for about 20 or 25. But anyhow, I'm sheepish about it. So yeah, I don't know if they're any good, but you can tell me. Yes?
A couple of slides ago, you had something about sacramentally. Did you on sacramental?
Oh, there it is, yeah. Oh, you want me to say more about it? Yeah. The idea seems to be, I mean, I hate to keep using the acorn, oak tree example, but there's a sense in which the oak tree is present in the acorn, you know? It's like just a matter of it growing and developing, right? That's part of the sacramental idea, is the potential, right? So it's, the higher is present in the lower in the sense of a potentiality, right? But I think Lewis, by talking about the sacramental relation, he does have in mind a kind of, you know, sacramental ontology, the way of thinking about the divine as being present in a real sense, the created order, right? So I think that is part of it, that you are meant to be a vessel in which God is alive and working, not only to make you a greater and greater image of God, but to also extend love and service to others around you, just like God does. So that's a hard question, a good question.
It's a start.
Okay, yeah, that's all I was attempting. Yeah.
I can't remember the quote, but something about what you're talking about, the divine image, or that we're growing into this image of God. But isn't there some quote where he says, when you look at your neighbor, you remember that you're looking at this divine flaming being, or
yes,
this demonic evil?
Right.
We really haven't
Yes.
spoken about how some people can grow
Right.
into something very
Right.
horrible and evil.
No, good point. I was alluding to that when I said something like, if all goes well for you. Yeah, so this is, you're alluding to a passage in The Weight of Glory where Lewis says something like, if you could see your neighbor for who they really could become,
Yeah.
right? And the potential there is two-edged, right? They could become this goddess, and you could see the potential for them becoming a goddess, or you can see the potential for them becoming the opposite of that, right? Lewis doesn't have a kind of determinism where everybody's, you know, headed no matter what in the good direction. Like your freedom, you have a choice about the matter. So yes, so if you think about a transposition like the acorn, you know, not all acorns succeed in becoming oak trees, right? And it's the same idea that things can atrophy, right? So you can move in the other direction, where you become less and less of the kind of creature you're meant to become, right? And if you move in that direction, sadly, yeah, you become less and less of a being, right? In the Great Divorce, the citizens of hell are almost non-entities. They're like stains, he says. They're just barely there, right? So yes, I wasn't meaning to deny, just I didn't want to spend more time on that. But yes, the potential here is two-sided. And that's why it's a momentous kind of fact about a person. Like, this is, you have the real potential to become this beautiful thing or not. Yeah. Yes?
Has Lewis said anything about sainthood?
What do you mean by sainthood?
Well, I mean, people are successful in bringing out the divine nature in themselves.
Right.
Does he have a favorite saint?
I don't know of him ever identifying a favorite saint, so I don't have an answer to that. Sainthood, if you mean after you sort of pass away and you're in heaven, yeah, we all become saints in the end. I don't know what he would say about, you know, this side of the threshold. There was another hand, yes.
For Lewis, is there an end to transposition? Like I know you said that you can never become like God, but does that mean that in heaven you're constantly evolving for eternity, never getting quite there, but getting closer? Or is there like a point when you're in heaven and that's just the farthest you're going?
Yeah, great. As far as I can tell, he thinks perpetual growth is what heaven is about. Yeah, that you continually keep growing. Yeah, that and he even hints in places that this means that heaven will be a place where we have challenges, right? That there's something, and this is a delicate point, but he thinks that there may be something analogous to suffering, right? That like suffering is crucial in this life to grow and to mature, and that there may be something like that, not a kind of moral evil kind of suffering, but real challenges. But Lewis seems a little ambivalent about that idea, but you can find it. But so yeah, perpetual growth and maybe some real challenges involved. And you can also ask, would you want it any other way? You know? Yes?
Forgive me if you already kind of touched on this. To add on to that, did C.S. Lewis fall more in line with like orthodox theosis or more with like sanctification?
Theosis. Yes. It's been argued, I think convincingly, that the theme of Mere Christianity, the book, is theosis. Like it's about becoming a little Christ. Like it's all, if you just look for it, you'll see, wow, it's all throughout. Once you get into book 2 through book 5, you see this theme progress all the way. So yeah, he definitely held to a doctrine of theosis. I don't know if he would, fine-tune it between divinization or whatever, but like becoming more and more like God, participating in the divine nature, becoming a little Christ, is definitely like not in the fine print on Lewis's account. Yeah. Yes?
Did he say anything to talk about like stagnation? If we're always on this edge of we're becoming more like God, or we have the absence of good.
Right.
I find most people are somewhere wrestling
right.
in their lives with both.
Yeah, so the question I think is does Lewis say anything about a kind of state where we're not moving, we're not growing, we're not devolving, we're just kind of stuck? I don't know, actually, offhand. I'm sure he seems alive to those kinds of dynamics. So I'm sure he would say, yeah, we often are sort of stuck. But he might also add like something, and maybe this is just me speaking, but like I feel like to be stuck is really if you're in a state where you're failing to grow, that's equivalent to moving back, like devolving, right? Yeah, if a plant is not growing, and it should be, then that's not a sign of health, right? But that's just me speaking there. I mean, it's me speaking all along here, but you know what I mean. Yeah.
Just if I might help with the last question
Good.
a little bit, it seems to me that the people in hell in the Great Divorce are stuck.
That's true.
Doing the same thing over.
Yeah. Yeah, they're approaching the limit of nothingness, and you might think like as you approach zero, it's like you have to slow down or something. So maybe that's stagnation happens as you approach non-being. They never quite cease to be. Right. Yeah. What's interesting is on Lewis's picture in The Great Divorce, the individuals in hell and the individuals in heaven. There's this interesting. They're a mirror image of each other. So in hell, the creatures on 2 levels. So there's the social level, and then there's the sort of the level, the value level, if I could put it this way. So in hell, the individuals, with respect to their character, they're increasingly exactly the same. They're all maximal navel gazers. They're always just totally self-absorbed. That's all they care about, right? So they're like almost duplicates. But socially, they're far apart. They keep moving away from each other, you know? It takes years to go see your neighbor in hell in this picture. So character, with respect to character, they're very, very similar. Socially, they're far apart. In heaven, it's the exact opposite. Saints, heavenly creatures, are increasingly different in their character, in their goodness. And yet socially, they're more and more intimate. Yeah. Yes?
Is the witness that Jesus refers to in John 17:21 the transposition that C.S. Lewis is like, in a sense, the end process?
Being one with the Father, one with Jesus. I do think that abiding in Christ, if I could use that way of talking about it, does involve letting the life of Christ dwell in you. And that does bring about a kind of process whereby you become increasingly, you're participating in the divine nature by letting Christ live through you. That does seem to, that is, not just on Lewis's account, but I think on the biblical account, crucial to growth and transformation. So it's more about the process of transformation. I wouldn't know whether that's best understood in terms of the concept of transposition or not, but that is part of what it means to be transformed. Yeah. Other questions? Or how are we doing?
Maybe one more? Or two more, maybe.
Back row, please.
Just a question. You mentioned a book coming out about Kierkegaard and Lewis.
Yeah.
What's the topic and
The topic? So my colleague at Baylor, well, he's retired, but C. Stephen Evans, he's a Kierkegaard scholar, and he and I are co-authoring a book where we're talking about the shared vision between Kierkegaard and Lewis on human nature, destiny, human uniqueness, a bunch of things, myth even. Yeah, what's fascinating, I think, is like the world of the people who read Lewis and the people who read Kierkegaard, there's some overlap, but it's kind of two different worlds almost. And yet the two figures have a lot in common in terms of what they really think and how they see the world. Some of it needs a little bit of unpacking, so that's what we're hoping to do. So it's about their shared view, and when there are differences, they're really interesting differences that illuminate things as well. If my co-author if he wants to write it fast, he's like, you know, he's retired and he has a lot of time to write, and you know, he has more of a sense of the clock, and I'm, you know, I have to teach a little bit, and so I don't know. Hopefully where are we at in this year? We're in September. Hopefully next summer we'll have a draft. We don't have a publisher. We haven't even gotten that far yet. We just have chapter sketches and a plan. But
maybe one more question. Tim, go ahead.
Yes.
This perhaps relates more to topics that you'll speak on tonight. But as you were talking, the idea of transposition just sounded very much like Imago Dei. And I guess I'm wondering, is Lewis just describing what we see in Genesis in different terms? Or is there an important fundamental difference, maybe that it extends to other nature and reality?
Yeah. Great question, and a good one maybe to finish on too. So is this Lewis's way of thinking about the Imago Dei? Is what's the relationship between transposition and being created in the image of God? Yes, it's definitely his way of thinking about the Imago Dei doctrine. So he thinks of, if you ask him, what does it mean to be an image of God? He would say, it's this. It's think about the concept of transposition. That's part of what's involved. To be in the image of God is to be a transposition of God. That's clear on his view, as I understand it. So yes, this is maybe I should have put that up front. This is definitely his way of explaining part of what it means to be created in the image of God. I'll say a little more about that tonight. Yeah. Thank you for that question. Yeah.
Let's thank our speaker.
Thank you so much.